Hi, this is Boki, and today I am going to be doing a not my thesis video. It's been a while since I've done one, but I wanted to talk about mental health and grad school. And this is definitely a video that I have had in the back of my mind that I've wanted to do basically since the beginning of when I started this series, but I've just been kind of trying to figure out how I wanted to approach it, whether I wanted to focus more on my personal story, whether I wanted to focus more broadly. I'm going to kind of lean more towards the broader kind of picture, kind of the factors in academia and grad school as well as science, kind of general STEM culture that can add challenges to dealing with mental health, as well as kind of perpetuating a lot of mental health issues. I am going to give a little bit of personal background so that I can give some context for where I'm coming from. It wouldn't be a not my thesis video if I didn't issue like a caveat before. My major caveat for today, and this is really important, I am not a mental health professional. What I do every day is engineer T cells. I am not remotely qualified to give prescriptive or diagnostic information about your mental health situation or mental health in general. So please do not take anything that I say today as coming from a level of expertise. It is very much coming from a personal place where I am just talking about my experience in different factors that I've observed. So if you are a mental health professional and you take issue with things that I say, I would also really welcome your comments, especially if you think that are things that I'm doing wrong or that I'm explaining badly, because I really don't want to do more harm. Starting off my own kind of personal story. I want to be clear, grad school did not give me anxiety or depression or OCD. These are things that I was diagnosed with later, but coming into grad school, these were issues that were probably lingering, but they had never gotten to a point where they really interfered with the functioning of my life. Then the first year of grad school happened. I think one of the big things is that this was like the first time I was really on my own. On top of that, I didn't really know what I was doing with my first year of grad school, and that created a whole level of stress and a lack of focus that made things really hard. And kind of going forward from there, even when I started to figure out like where I was going to be working, a lot of those things kind of perpetuated and continued, and there was just a high level of stress that I got to a point where I just wasn't happy with the way that my mental health was interfering with my ability to be happy and to be productive. What I found for me personally with anxiety and depression is that getting help, it's actually kind of reminds me a lot of being hungover. And if you've had the misfortune of being hungover, maybe you understand this. When you wake up after you've maybe had a little bit too much to drink, the things that will make you feel better, like drinking water and eating food, a lot of times make you want to throw up. They might make you feel nauseated. And to me, as someone with anxiety, especially social anxiety, the idea of calling a stranger and asking for help for an undiagnosed mental health issue was incredibly nerve-wracking to the point of nauseating. But I did eventually do it. I talked to someone at my school's student health center, and they recommended that I go to the Center for Anxiety Disorders. That's a part of my school, and even that took me some time to actually follow through on, but I eventually did, and I am really happy that I did. For me, I went through a protocol that I think was associated with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Again, I am not a mental health professional, but to the best that I understand it, I think kind of the goal of this treatment is to assess your mindset when you have like a certain reaction or you're feeling a certain way, to assess why you feel that way and how you want to respond, so that when you are actually in that stressful situation, you've kind of created a mindset or a framework that you can respond more productively. And this is something that for me worked really well. I don't know if it's because it involved like workbooks and homework and like applying numbers to feelings, whatever it was something that worked very well for me. The impact that it's had in my life was something that I could see both immediately and something that I've also been processing in the long term. Like even now, a few years later, there are ways where I feel like I see it really, really benefiting me. I think it made me more willing to take on challenging new situations that before I would have really felt kind of intimidated by the level of anxiety that I knew those situations were going to cause for me. So again, this is just to give the personal context for where I come from with my own mental health, and now I'm going to get into the broader discussion, and some of those personal things are going to come up again as well in there. But first, I have to say, Mental health obviously has a lot of stigma in society in general. There's a lot of feelings that people express about mental health, whether it comes from ignorance or a lack of empathy. A lot of the issues that I'm going to talk about probably manifest in similar ways in other areas. It's just that I think there are some issues that are unique to academia and the kind of culture that academia inspires and the kind of people that are attracted to academia. And I also just get really frustrated. I feel like I kind of grew up in academia, having academic parents, and going through college and grad school. Even if I don't know if I'm going to stay in academia, I have a lot of affection and respect for the idea of it. And I think academia at its core, when it's really living up to its ideals, is an environment that inspires a lot of people to think in very new and exciting ways. And that is invaluable, I think, to the kind of progress that a lot of countries have been able to make in terms of science and literature and culture in so many different areas. But academia can sometimes be a little bit up its own butt sometimes about how great it is for these things, and I think it can focus so much on what makes academia so great that it overlooks the more frustrating sides of this world. To start off with, because this is something that I think plays into the shifting perspective that I had before and after I went through therapy, which is just kind of this basic, I guess, idea that as academics and maybe even as scientists, if you are both even, is this idea that we are rational, that we are these critical thinkers because we are in academia and that is what we are paid to do. The thing that I think we forget is that just because we have to be rational for our job does not mean that we are rational in general. We are people, we are humans, we are the products of countless reactions in our bodies that are not within our controls. When we think about that in the context of being sick, physically, when something goes wrong in the rest of our body, we understand that. But with our brains, we have a hard time acknowledging that and accepting that for what that means. That it means that sometimes we have feelings that are not rational. This was a huge thing for me. Before I went through therapy, what anxiety and depression, what I thought that was my rational side combating an irrational emotional response. If, for example, if there was a homework assignment that was really stressing me out, it was my rational side was just do it. You just gotta do it and finish it. And my feelings were all no, but what if it's hard? What if I can't do it? And then these sides were basically at war with each other. I spent more time yelling at myself for being upset at myself for not being able to do it, and it just becomes a cycle. I was upset at myself for being upset at myself for being upset at myself, and just keeps on going. And what I thought therapy was going to do was going to reconcile that, in the sense that I thought it was going to make my rational side win. That's not what happened. What actually happened is that I learned to treat my emotions as valid. Not to say that I'm necessarily right. The goal wasn't to say oh, if you're upset about a situation that you're right to be upset about it, but the goal was to say, well, you're upset about it, acknowledge that you're upset. What I really got, for me at least, from therapy was being able to say it is okay to feel a certain way. It doesn't have to be rational. But what you do with that is something that you can start to work with if you actually acknowledge the way you feel. If you don't acknowledge it, if you don't say, I feel a certain way, I'm upset, if you don't acknowledge that, all you do is fight with yourself and you don't really proceed necessarily in a healthy way. So that was something that for me took some time and really felt kind of stepping away from the thought process that I wanted to be ingrained in myself because I thought that was better in line with the culture around me and the kind of scientist and academic that I was aspiring to be. I think there are kind of some specific things to the culture in academia that can make this even harder. Basically, in academia, kind of going back to the sort of free thinking culture, is this idea of independence. I think this is really at the heart of why a lot of academics do what they do. Something that manifests, I think, most profoundly in the idea of tenure, where if you are a professor and you get tenure, you are set. You have a job for life, and that means you can do whatever you want, as long, short of I don't know, destroying the world. I mean, you can probably destroy the world as long as you get grants. That is the goal of academia, to reach that level of independence. That plays out in a lot of really cool ways, things that I benefit from. I don't have to work 9 to 5. I can work whatever hours I want. I can show up to lab when I want. And on days where I want to do, say, writing, and I don't need to be working in the lab, sometimes I will work from home or I will work at the library. I don't have to worry about things like vacations or sick days. There are these things that like I don't understand because they are associated with like a normal job. That's really great in a lot of ways. It also has some major downfalls, and the most obvious one that people talk about is the lack of work-life balance, because when you have that kind of informality like institutionalized in your system, it creates really fuzzy boundaries. I say like, oh hey, we don't work 9 to 5. Instead, we basically work like a lot. A lot of us are okay with that. We've come into grad school with that knowledge that we're going to be working all the time. The expectation is that you are always going to be working, and that if you are not working, if you are not thinking about your research, you are doing something wrong. If you're not working all the time, then you're wasting your time. And that can be a mentality that is incredibly pervasive as a grad student, and I'm sure it extends as well to people who are working as a postdoc, if you're working as a professor, if you're someone who really needs to seek out help for mental health issues. It can mean that you don't want to take the time to take care of yourself, whether it's through some form of self-care or just taking some time to breathe, or even through things like therapy. For a few months, I would just basically take an hour off on Tuesdays and go get treatment, go to get therapy. I felt supported in that. I felt like I was coming from a situation where my advisor wanted what was best for me, and so it was okay for me to take this time. I don't think all grad students feel this way. Based on my conversations, I don't think it's something that is actually inherently a part of our culture, because that's taking time away from lab. Like, that's taking away from time that you should be spending getting your research done. It can be incredibly hard to escape from that mindset, even if it's not actually how the people around you feel. I try to be like fairly open about like my mental health, whatever kind of journey, I guess. That's how I'm describing it in this video, because I feel like when I've talked to my friends about mental health, it's been incredibly helpful for me, and it's been helpful for other people to just have a basic conversation. And I have these conversations, we're all like, oh, you felt the same way that I feel. I thought you had your shit together, but you were also like freaked out by the same things that I am. You just think like everyone else has figured it out on their own, why can't I? Especially when you add things in like impostor syndrome, which is a huge part of grad school, this feeling that like you are just deceiving people and that you are not actually deserving of the place that you have. When you get in that place where you feel like you don't deserve what you have, it's incredibly hard to feel like you deserve help. Something that I've seen come up like on Twitter discussions about mental health in grad school, where people are like, well, if you can't cut it, you can't cut it. And I just kind of think that's bullshit. You can be a good scientist or a good researcher or a good academic and also need help. Like, those aren't incongruous thoughts to me. It reminds me a lot of a Twitter thread that Amanda, who on YouTube, she posts as A Scientist Reads, and on Twitter she posts as Tangible Ansible. And this is a Twitter thread that I actually mentioned in my postdoc question video. She talked about her transition from grad school to industry research. At her new job, when she was making this transition, the people there told her not only does she like not have to work the same kind of amount or hours that she did in grad school, it would be better for her if she didn't, like just mentally, like so that she wouldn't burn out. I just thought that was incredible, because we associate this idea of a lack of work-life balance with science, but like industry research is still science, and it's incredibly productive in this country, and yet it seems like the scientists who work in that environment are able to do it in a way that's not coming at the expense of like their entire life. On top of all of this is something that I think is just generally frustrating about academia. And it's something that plays into mental health, but it also plays into other issues as well. And this is something that I am basing off of conversations with faculty from like different types of schools and in different fields. So I feel like it's generally true, but I am open to the idea that like there are some schools that have figured this out. And what I am talking about is the lack of training for professors. When you're a professor, you might be running a lab, especially if you are at a research institution. Even if you're managing 1 or 2 students, you are a manager. Professors are hired ostensibly based off their research experience, off of their teaching experience. None of that experience says anything about the kind of manager that they're going to be. They're never really trained on things like as basic on like a budget. They're not trained on things like, you know, how to hire a student, how to fire a student, how to deal with like lab conflicts, how to deal with things like, say, sexual harassment or mental health issues. The amount of time and effort that people put into becoming a professor is immense. And so much of that experience is important, but it's not actually going to be at the core of what they do in terms of their daily activities, like actually managing people and how to establish things like boundaries and how to provide things like help. We have a lot of professors who maybe they have good intentions, they just don't have the resources or the training to deal with students who might need help. And if you're a professor, for the amount of time that you're gonna be a professor, you're probably gonna come across like at least one or two, probably a shit ton more of students who will need some kind of assistance, and yet you are not being trained on how to help them or how to identify who needs help. I personally think it's irresponsible of institutions. I think it's also bad for them. You would have better labs if you have better managers. You would have better research output if you have better managers. At least I feel that way. And so the fact that faculty members are not trained on how to become better managers because they're somehow these gods of research, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm sure there are like whatever mitigating factors that make it hard to give this training. I just think that these issues are never really going to be fully addressed until we can start to address how professors learn to deal with them, whether it's for their students, whether it's for themselves. Your life as a professor is so much easier if I, as a student, can get access to help. I feel like I became a much better grad student, I became a better researcher, I became a better scientist after I went to get help. And at its core, I feel like academia needs to understand this, that you will have better students if you can provide them with the help that they need. Fetishizing this idea of like suffering for the sake of research, you're just creating a group of people who are going to be disillusioned with what you do or who are going to perpetuate the idea further. And you're not going to get better work as a result. I think that academia would really benefit from creating an environment where you can bring in a multitude of people from a multitude of experiences and mindsets to be able to do research. I think that this is fundamentally beneficial to academia, and it's something that underlies my belief in diversity, whether it's gender, sexuality, race. The more different brains you have looking at a problem or a question, the more interesting answers you will come to. Addressing issues in mental health is a big part of that, because you can bring in more people to your field if you don't create an environment that is hostile to them. This is something I believe in. If you disagree, we can talk it out, but I'm also curious, like, I focus a lot on issues related to science and STEM. So if you are in grad school in other fields, I would love to know if this is like a similar experience. I know that in science fields, we have like a specific kind of lab question that I'm curious if it translates over to other fields, like in humanities, where you might be more kind of on your own. I'm also really curious if you have been in any kind of grad school program or outside of grad school, outside of academia, in any other kind of workplace, if you think there are specific programs that have been really good for building mental health kind of awareness and treatment. I will talk more below in the comments or on Twitter or Instagram, and I am always open to talking more about my own personal journey. It's just for this video I wanted to focus more broadly. So if you have other questions, I would be happy to talk more about that. Hey guys, I was just editing my video and I realized there's a few things that I wanted to include. A big one is just that I've been kind of talking a lot of smack about academia, but one of the things that was nice for me that made getting help a little bit less intimidating is that being at a school, finding resources for getting help for my mental health was a little bit less overwhelming, because all I pretty much had to do was Google the name of my school and mental health. So if you are in a similar position, I would recommend doing something like that. Or if you have like a student health center that you can go to, I think they should be able to kind of point you in the right direction. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you are looking for help of your own. We'll also include some links for further reading below if you would like to learn more. I just want to kind of emphasize again here, I tried to mention throughout the video, but it's really important to me kind of just on a personal level that I make this clear. I had a lot of support through my time in grad school in terms of taking care of my mental health, both from like family and friends as well as my advisor. While I'm talking a lot about kind of bigger cultural, institutional issues that I think are at play in academia and STEM that I think need to be addressed, I don't want anyone to feel discouraged. I think it is possible to develop a support system. I feel like I was lucky in that I had a good support system built in, and that's where some of my frustration with these other systematic issues kind of come in, because I wish that other of my friends didn't have to deal with some of the stuff that they've had to deal with in terms of their advisors. So I just want to just say that again and just issue a blanket thank you to everyone who has supported me through my grad school time. So yeah, thank you for watching, and bye.